warm welcome. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Face to Face. Well, as we know, Sri Lanka is still recovering from the 2022 economic crisis. And towards the end of last year, we got a brand new government. They presented their very first budget to the parliament on the 17th of February 2025. And on the 21st of March this year, it was passed in parliament with an overwhelming majority. To be specific, 159 in favour and 45 against. Now, we're 7 months into this brand new fiscal year, and we get this question: is everything really going according to plan? To help us unpack how things are shaping out, everything that has happened so far in this fiscal year, I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by Dhananath Fernando, CEO of the Advocata Institute. Good evening, Dhananath.
Good evening, Dhananath.
Let's start off things on a bit of a light note. We're 7 months into this brand new fiscal year. In your view, how do you sum up how Sri Lanka is doing so far financially? And when it comes to the fiscal aspect, do you think the way things are going is good for Sri Lanka?
So far, we haven't done anything wrong. We are pretty much on target to an extent. The challenge is there are also a lot of, while we haven't done anything wrong, there are a lot of right things that also need to be done. And on certain reforms, we have to catch up with, speed-wise or pace-wise, we have to accelerate a bit so far. So that's where we are at the moment. But at the same time, there are some mounting challenges ahead, which we can discuss at the latter part, which is the situation in geopolitics as well as on Trump tariff. But overall, in terms of revenue and expenditure, we are pretty much on targets as per the revealed information so far. Also, we need to understand the budget. Unlike the last time, it wasn't presented in November, it was presented in February. So it's only about 4 or 5 months. And also we are getting prepared for the next budget because it has to be presented by November. But overall, we haven't done anything wrong. We are pretty much on targets. That's why we were able to get the IMF tranche. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of other right things that probably I highly recommend to accelerate, given the uncertain geopolitical environment.
So now we know that so far, 7 months in, we are on track. But we have, of course, had several turbulences, like you said, regarding the geopolitical situation in the world. Let's get into that. But before that, let's focus on our position with the IMF. Now, just last month, Sri Lanka hosted the first Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Geetha Gopinath, who stressed that Sri Lanka's hard-won fiscal progress must stay on course to avoid repeating the past mistakes. And these past mistakes that she cited were years of falling tax revenue, reckless borrowing, depleted reserves, as well as unsustainable public debt. Now, of course, we are working in line with this IMF program. But within the country, are there any other domestic risks that we are facing that could potentially derail us from following this IMF program smoothly?
At the moment, on what Dr. Gopinath said, we have a lot of, how shall I say, some level of institutional building and acts have been brought into parliament to avoid from derailing. For an example, the Public Debt Management Act, and at the same time, the independence of the central bank, because earlier the government could liberally borrow from the central bank when they are not meeting the targets. Now you have brought some restrictions to it, and there are limitations, caps on your primary surplus, your expenditure, so on and so forth. So on that front, I think we are somewhat covered to an extent. Very little room if you really want to derail. Of course, the government has a supermajority, so if they really want to, they have that option, but we don't see that they're using that option. They are pretty much staying on targets, and that's what even President Andrew Kumara committed to the IMF, because he wanted to make this the last program that we wanted to be with the IMF. And so which was endorsed by Dr. Gopinath, saying that as long as we can stay on the fiscal course, like the Sri Lanka can stay on the targets, that most likely this will be the last program. The challenge is not on the past, but what is coming in the future on one side, but the other is the domestic risk. Since you specifically asked, it could be the weather factor, which is beyond everyone's control, because generally for our recovery from 2022, the weather has been an unsung hero, because not many people focused about it, but we had excellent weather, because when you have better weather, no floods, better rains, because then it helps on agriculture on one side. Second, it helps on our electricity generation, because otherwise, if you look at our electricity generation mix, it's mainly skewed from 2022 to so far more on the renewable side, including hydro, because you had my chairman Murtaza says generally God is a Sri Lankan. He has been very kind that we had good weather, and which also activates the agricultural sector. So on that front, that has been positive so far. If there's an internal risk, that could be one actually, the weather factor. If there's a unfortunate drought, or if there are some changes in the weather patterns, that could impact our productivity additionally to the other external threats.
Now, you also talked about the acceleration of certain reforms that you would recommend to the government. Can we talk about that a bit?
Sure. So there's no magic, Theruni. For an example, what we need for Sri Lanka for the moment is the economic growth, because our debt becomes sustainable, our revenue is going to increase based on the growth that we take. For the simple explanation is of understanding of the common man. If the size of the economy is like a pie of cake, then the size, the weight and the volume has to grow. Then only everyone has a better share. To happen that, there are so many restrictions that is blocking us. One is definitely the customs regulation on the global trade, that there are reforms done. In fact, the NPP manifesto has promised and mentioned the single national window. Of course, we understand you cannot do it overnight. It takes a little bit of time. So that has to happen. The tariff structure has to be simple. It has to be predictable, and it has to be digitized, and there has to be a national single window where all the agencies, institutes come together on a single platform, so it's easy to transfer documents, provide authorization, so on and so forth. That's number one reform. And also it becomes more relevant given the geopolitical context that we are in, because there are tariff barriers. So it's important that we remove the tariff barriers internally, that we can move forward. That's number one. Number two is there's another main bottleneck for investment. That is the land issue. If you bring an investor, you really you are finding it really hard to give him a plot of land for investment, because already more than 90% of our industrial land is already occupied. So the government has to actively allocate land, and land is not just like the bare land. This requires electricity supply, water, waste management, infrastructure. All that has to come in that package. It has to be like a plug and play, where the investor comes, the plot has been allocated, electricity is given, you just need to put the factory up and quickly run as fast as possible, because there is a cost for delaying it. So that's the second reform that is required. And what we have been recommending is, because government also has so many other things they are engaged, mainly on the anti-corruption front, from the outset we can see some progress. So while the government focuses on that, you get the private sector, if possible, even to manage and operate these industrial lands, because then it is the private operator, it's easy to attract the investment, and also to operate it in a condition that the investors are encouraged. That's number two. Number three is not very popular, but I think it's needed. That is the state-owned enterprises reform. It's also in the IMF report that it's also a benchmark, structural benchmark, in a way that they have to bring it to at least a holding company setup, all the state-owned enterprises, because at the moment there are a lot of transparency issues, governance issues, when all these state-owned enterprises are under each ministry. I will stop from there. Those are the main three that I would prioritize at the moment.
All right. Okay. So now when we talk about the fiscal year so far, we can't not address the elephant in the room, which is, like you said, the geopolitical situation, and to be specific, the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has imposed on many countries. Well, 44%, now down to 30%. Some would say it's a relief of forms. But can we talk about the ripple effects that this has on the fiscal path that Sri Lanka has set for this year? How much does it throw us off track?
According to the IMF, it can affect our GDP, or like the size of that cake, from 0.25% to about 1.5%. That's significant in that context. That means your economy can actually shrink by about between that range based on the tariff structure and like how the other countries are going to react. In terms of exports, which is very important for our forex and also to build our reserves, it can have an impact up to 3% of GDP, which is quite significant, which is about $2 to $3 billion. But again, depending on how the other countries react. Now, the main impact would be on apparel industry, rubber industry, mainly gem and jewelry, some food concentrates. There will be a, knock-on impact. The impact would be mainly can come at three orders or rounds. First is because President Trump is increasing tariff not only for Sri Lanka, to everyone else. So that means the first victim is going to be the US consumer. When you increase the tariffs, the prices in the US market will go up. For an example, a garment which was priced at like say $10, which will become more than $10. It can be $11 or $50. So that will bring the demand down from the US market. Now someone can think, okay, what if we can't we diversify to a different market? The challenge is US market is so unique that their purchasing power is very high that it is not easy to diversify at a shorter period of time. So the first round would be the demand contraction from the US, because everyone else is also increasing the tariff. So when someone is going to prioritize their expenditure, apparel may not be their top priority, because already you have to pay rent, you have to do for transport, healthcare, education and all that. The second round is also now President Trump's tariff is different from one country to the other. Earlier there was a level playing field, because under the WTO, unless you are in a free trade agreement with US, everyone should get like a same tariff. And now it's different. We have 30%, European Union is also 30%, Bangladesh is 5% higher than us. But the Vietnam is only 20% and Indonesia 19%. So then now there's there's a advantage for those countries than us, especially if both of the countries are competing for the same products or for the same markets. So in that sense, we are at a disadvantageous position. So based on that, actually the orders can shift. Factories can move in a longer period, but at the moment, because if Vietnam has 20%, we are at 30%, of course the buyer might think, okay, why don't we get it from Vietnam, because it's 10% cheaper. Other challenge is this apparel manufacturing is low margin, high volume. It's a high volume industry, so the margins are in like few dollar cents. You are basically getting a bigger profit by trading higher volumes, so that even 5%, 10% sometimes matters. So that's the second round. The third round is now with 30% tariff for EU and different tariff rates for other countries. They are also our main sources of tourism. When they break their supply chains, when they have domestic unemployment, the people who are visiting our countries will go down. So as a result, the service sector may also have some level of impact. At the same time, the first thing that we discussed also on the government revenue, because these companies are basically contributing a significant tax contribution, so as there be an unemployment impact. So that's a fourth impact. So on that front, there can be a knock-on impact because of the Trump tariff. But we really do not know which direction it is going, whether he will, over a period of time, whether he will bring it down or whether he's going to continuously use it as a tool. However, bringing it down from 44% to 30% is commendable. I think we have to we have to endorse or congratulate the negotiation team, but I think we have to constantly engage and bring it down further till we become at least competitive in this new environment.
So now let's talk about where we stand when it comes to revenue. Well, considering the shocks like the US tariff, which is still not in effect, but will soon be coming into effect, as well as certain geopolitical conflicts that we've had so far. Very short term, we had Israel and Iran, as well as the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, seeing how all of these are playing out and how these are all technically external shocks to our country's economy, do you think that we will have an issue when it comes to achieving the revenue target that we have set for this year?
If the US tariffs are going to continue, there will be a challenge on achieving the revenue targets. But rather than the revenue targets, the main challenge will come on our reserve targets, because when you have limited dollar inflow, then central bank, they would be in a difficult position to build up reserves, or else there is a chance that the currency will depreciate, because when there is less dollars, if the central bank if they also wants to build reserves, then there will be limited dollars for importers and others for other needs. At the same time, if there are job losses and unrest, then it may have an impact on the revenue target as well, because when the companies are losing businesses, there's a bigger ecosystem, so the contribution becomes slow, and overall the economy when it shrinks, everyone loses out. So President Trump's factor is a big factor, and it's always like a moving target. You really cannot predict, because as you mentioned, things have been changing. There was an Iranian issue at one point, and now there is a tariff thing has come up, and it may go down again, and something else will come up. So it is always created a lot of uncertainty for the business environment.
And when it comes to the fiscal plan, something that's very important to our country, especially to our country as a developing nation, is investor confidence. With this tariff shock, as well as the major political shift that our country underwent last year, as well as through global headwinds, do you think Sri Lanka has done enough this year to reassure both domestic as well as foreign investors that investing in Sri Lanka will be worth it?
There are two sides to it, Theruni. One is investors looking at also the global sentiment. So as I mentioned, with an uncertain global environment, it's very difficult to convince them on one side. Second is investors are visiting, or like they are investing based on the markets. Like they need to have, as I mentioned, the land factor, the labor factor, the capital factor, and so many other factors also they check, like the regulatory framework. On that front, I think my humble opinion is we are fairly slow, because as I mentioned, there's a land issue, which of course not this government's fault, or like it cannot be solved on short term. But I would encourage and endorse that we get into that path, resolving it early, because that gives a signal for the investors, okay, this country is open for investments. And same as on labor, because there's a labor shortage, many people left the country. So we need to have better labor regulation, so then they can attract proper talent and operate in an environment to generate a dollar revenue. So investments wise, I still feel, while the corruption element has been to an extent, I think the perception is that, okay, no one is now asking any kickbacks, or the corruption is fairly low at this investment environment. While it is a very good reason, which is a hygiene factor, but there are other motivating factors needs to come in for investors to invest. And again, when you compare the numbers for foreign direct investments, there's an increase, if I remember right, from about 30% from last year to this year. But overall, it's about so far it's about 200 million to 300 million for the first few months, which is not enough given the targets that we have for growth. We have to absorb more. And also we should understand how these foreign direct investment numbers are calculated, because already if it's a foreign company who retain their profits and reinvesting back, that is also considered as a foreign direct investment, which is not really like a greenfield investment where a new company comes and sets up something and become an export hub and try to export. What we need is more tradable exports, so that's where we become competitive on one side. On the other side, we also earn a dollar revenue.
Well, we've got several more important matters to address right throughout this show, but we'll be heading into a short commercial break. Stay tuned with us. This is Face to Face.
With your name, your unique talent, your phone number. To Sri Lanka's Got Talent PO Box 100 Ratmalana, or WhatsApp us on 076 599 7788.
Welcome back. This is Face to Face. I'm in conversation with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of the Advocata Institute, on whether this fiscal year is actually going according to plan. Well, let's pick up where we left off. Now, Dhananath, we have an ambitious revenue target each year that we set through the budget, and their spending discipline becomes a very crucial factor. Especially for this new government, it has very high expectations on its shoulders. So far this fiscal year, do you think we are managing our spending well enough to stay on track, given the fact that we are still recovering from a major economic crisis?
We have to look at two things. One is we cannot overspend. At the same time, we also have to spend, on the channels that we have to spend. So I think we are on track. But even on the revenue, as you know, the customs marked their 1 trillion revenue within 6 months. At the same time, when it comes to expenditure, they have allocated significant capital expenditure as well. The important thing is, while we do the allocation, also make sure that it is spent wisely and as well as like without wasting the money, because you have to check the productivity and effectiveness also on spending. So where the spending needs to come is on education, on healthcare, and on protecting our social safety nets. So that's where you have to drive your expenditure better. I think we are so far okay, but as I always mention, there's room for improvement. We have always been commenting on the expenditure that we incur on state-owned enterprises reforms, which is not very popular, but that's a wasteful spending in my view, because you are basically trying to protect an industry which is not quite competitive by state trying to do it, where you have other options that you can take up. So on that front, there are areas for improvement, but overall, I don't see we are overspending or underspending. But of course, the numbers needs to also come up. It's slow for the moment, but I do not see any major derailing, or we haven't started any. We haven't started spending on completely a new area or things like that. So, and also the government has, to an extent, given an indication that they are quite cautious on expenditure at the same time. That, I mean, sometimes some of the activities may not save a lot of money, but it gives the public that sentiment, okay, someone is, concerned about the taxpayer expenditure, so then they are encouraged to contribute to the revenue, which sentiment is also quite important. So as at now, I do not see any major derailing. But at the same time, we have to calculate the effectiveness of the spending as well, because there are things that we have to spend money. But the truth is, from our income, about 65% to 80% goes for interest payment. So that is a major expenditure line item which you cannot change. So the rest is quite smaller proportions which comes for other line items. So for that, we have to improve debt sustainability and grow the economy. That's the only solution we have.
Do you think this new government that we have now has communicated its economic vision as well as the fiscal direction that it plans on taking the country along clearly enough for the business community to engage in its activities with confidence? Or are there any recommendations in your view that you would give to the government on how to improve confidence of the business community?
I would recommend that having a plan beyond the IMF program. So at the moment, government is pretty much sticking to the IMF program, which is a good thing. But where we can improve is by only sticking to the IMF program, Theruni, we will not be able to overcome through this crisis. Best example is on, let's say, the electricity. Electricity, what IMF has recommended is a cost reflective pricing. Okay, the cost goes up, the price goes up. But what is needed for the industry is the cost to bring down. And the cost to bring down doesn't come from the IMF program. The cost to bring down, you have to do reforms in the electricity sector. And that's where some of my worries comes in, that on some of the amendments that has planned to be brought into the Electricity Act may restrict us from opening up for private capital. That may keep the electricity cost as it is, or even it will increase further. So in that case, the business community will have a challenge. But at the same time, I think in terms of communication also, there is room for improvement. But as I mentioned, with the IMF program and with the rest of the commitments, we are pretty much okay. And even on the tariff negotiations, we managed to, compared to other countries, we took a quite a aggressive, like a very how shall I say, enthusiastic approach. But it's important that we do not reverse some of the things that we have done. At the same time, there are some sunrise industries that the government has to look at actively on regulation, such as like the gaming and betting industry, which is a discussion now. So government can basically increase their revenue by being a better regulator, rather than trying to compete in the business. And they can communicate the same for the private sector, because they are the one who do businesses. So then you can provide confidence to them, and that's where we need to move if we are serious about our growth numbers.
Public trust and confidence are also two very important factors for any budget to hold. Now, from what you've observed so far, 7 months into this fiscal year, does the general public sentiment align with the country's economic fundamentals? Or is there some kind of a disconnect between the two? What do you think? And how could this impact our ability to stick to this year's fiscal plan?
That's a difficult question. Not sure about the public sentiment, but I think generally how you can, as a proxy, what you can think is, if public is not unhappy, generally there are protests, you can see the pressure building up, which actually we do not see at the moment. Less number of protests, or there are concerns about this online, what you call e-commerce platforms. There are complaints by the public, but I think still the government has the political capital to get the reforms done. So I think because people are watchful on the anti-corruption drive, that's one of the main concerns by the people. But my recommendation would be, do not underestimate the importance of the economic reforms program, because if you slow down the economic reforms program, then that's where the the cost side of people's budget is going to go up. At that point is where both sides will fail, because when people are quite not happy with their expenditure, and when they have inflation, when they see things are not going well on the economic front, then again your anti-corruption drive will also face challenges, because then it looks like you are driving an anti-corruption front just to cover up the hiccups in the economic front. So I think it's important that we take both things together. The government has the political capital. So what I recommend is, reforms has, it doesn't have really a color, like it's not green or it's not red. There's no main there are ideological frameworks, but what we need to do is quite straightforward. You need the private investment, you need to have a better regulatory framework, you have to drive the anti-corruption stuff. So those are quite given and basic stuff. So on those things, I think we have to have a active role, and we should not care about like who did it or who initiated it. We just have to do the right thing. As it was famously said, we have to do the right thing even no one is doing it, and if even everyone is doing it, the wrong is wrong. So we have to get the right thing and the economic reforms program forward. If we want to keep the public sentiment on the positive side, at the same time to progress the country to the next stage.
So throughout this conversation, a couple of times you emphasized how important economic growth is for us. And Sri Lanka has been striving to achieve export-oriented economic growth. Now, of course, we do have a Trump tariff that is set to hit the country on the 1st of August, and there are certain competing countries, like you said, we have Vietnam as well as Indonesia, certain other countries that also heavily focus on exports that have lower rates than us. But all this time, let's forget the Trump tariff for now. All these years, what has been holding us back as opposed to the other countries when it comes to achieving export-oriented growth?
All the barriers are mainly internal barriers, as I mentioned, because any industry works based on the factor markets, which we learned in like grade 9 or grade 11. Land has to be there, labor has to be feasible, capital has to be feasible. So as I mentioned, land is a big issue, and that's one of the main recommendations even by Advocata in the coming budget. There's a big program going for so many years called BIMSAVIA, where people get actually a cadastral map or like a certificate for their land that they own. It's a title. Now what we have is a deed system where you like come to a contract and you register that contract, but actually what we need is a title where it's like a commodity, like you own this phone, you can prove that you own this phone, and no one is going to dispute the to the perimeter of the phone, because you can easily show that you own it, like a vehicle. I mean, no one is coming and saying, okay, I own 50% or 60% of that vehicle, because you have a way to prove that this is my vehicle. So same way, the land, if you bring it to a map, then actually you can show it. And that is what is required for all investors, investments, businesses across the board. Not only for these big investors who are investing in industrial zones, even for an individual to build a house, you have to have that title, because when you have the title, that you can use it as a security to access for capital, because when you go to the bank, they want a proof to show that actually you own this land. So that titling system is important. That BIMSAVIA is happening for, I don't know, for so long. It's very slow. We have to accelerate that. Even we encourage the government to spend, allocate more money, which is required, because the economic impact would be much larger. Same with labor, because we need labor to developing industries. So there are so many labor regulations. I think there was one good move that the nighttime restrictions were removed for female or in the hotel industry, which is important, because when you have tourists, we should give the access for our female labor force to participate in these economic activities based on their will and based on their wish. So those regulatory framework has to change. And another industry is tourism industry, which we can do a lot. But again, there are so many regulatory barriers that is basically restricting us. I just mentioned two. It's same for capital and same for when someone's going to register a business. So those barriers has to remove. Then the growth will take itself. Because when people are innovative, everyone wants to earn money and improve their revenue. I mean, no one is saying, no, I'm happy with what I earn. Everyone wants to do that. What we need to do is to remove the barriers, so then they can do it better and more productively and effectively. Then the growth takes itself. What the government need to do is, they can do it, but they should not intervene with someone else's freedom. So you regulate it, and then the government also takes a proportion of it, and then both sides get prosper. I think that's the way that we need to move forward.
Well, we have 5 months more left in this fiscal year. 7 months are down, and we have analyzed what happened so far. Dhananath, what makes you most confident that we can stick to this year's budget plan? And also, if you had to pick just one thing, what's one thing that we cannot absolutely get wrong if we want to stay on track?
I'm confident that we will be able to stick to the budget plan and even the next IMF tranche, which will be based on the budget that we are proposing. One thing that is non-negotiable is do not reverse the Central Bank Independence Act, which we do not see anything has been spoken. But my worry is if we miss our, if we do not do the other reforms like the electricity one, which we have done, but now I'm a little worried that whether we are going to reverse it with the new amendments and the state-owned enterprises reforms. If we do not do that, very likely that we will have to come back to the changing of the Central Bank Act in a long run, because when you really do not, when you're bleeding money for state-owned enterprises and when your electricity cost is going up, and that means you are not developing your industries, so then the government takes more and more responsibility on the expenditure side, because then you have to increase Astasuma, you have to have more and more social safety net programs. So then when you really do not have money and when you are not generating enough income, then you have to borrow. But when you have to borrow money, you also cannot let the interest rates go up. And that time you build the pressure by your own to change the Central Bank Independence Act. So on money printing, that's 100% non-negotiable. The second thing, if I have a second choice, that would be the state-owned enterprises reforms. But I understand there's a bit of an ideological stance that the government thinking on like keeping a lot of enterprises under the state purview. We are fine with it. At least bring the Temasek model, sort of a holding company model. At least that will bring some rescue, not fully in my view, but at least it is a better form than what is at the moment.
Well, it is clear that Sri Lanka is, like we discussed this whole time, we are still recovering from a massive economic blow from a few years ago. And of course, our path forward will not be easy, but it's clear that it will be possible to stay on track and ultimately reach our goals if, like Dhananath said right throughout, certain tough decisions are made without hesitation. Well, thank you so much, Dhananath, for joining us this evening on Face to Face. Well, thank you to all of our viewers for joining us this evening as well. Take care. Good night.